Yeah, I saw the Ballon d'Or got announced. I always think that award is bad, and it's going to be hard to convince me otherwise. It's not as pointless as the ESPY, but it's right about there. Hello, and welcome to Expected Own Goals, Meaningless Friendlies, Meaningless Awards Edition. I am your host, Eric Morgan.
I'm Evan Davis. I'm putting meaningless awards in quotes.
I'm also putting meaningless friendlies in lighter quotes.
These friendlies are pretty meaningless.
Yeah, they are pretty meaningless. Do you want to start with the friendlies, or do you want to start
let's get them out of the way.
I feel like we could start.
We've got one more to go.
Yeah.
Because of this stupid international window. But yeah, the U.S. played Iceland in Austin and Nashville over the weekend, won by a combined scoreline of 6-2. What does this mean for the World Cup, Eric?
On a per resident per goal rate, Iceland is kicking the U.S.'s ass.
As they tend to do when they win any game.
As they tend to do in international competition. It doesn't mean much. I think it was the U.S. women's account that was like celebrating Kelly O'Hara tonight in our matchup with New Zealand.
Iceland.
And if you don't know, but they said New Zealand on the account.
I didn't. Oh shit.
Yeah. And it's like, if you don't get right who you are celebrating, how seriously are you taking these friendlies? And so back-to-back games against Iceland. Yeah, I mean, if anything, I'll say this. The Icelandic team showed a bit of stick and have been more impressive than I expected. And the first of these two games was just filled with life-affirming, beautiful, beautiful goals. Kind of like I had very limited expectations for these friendlies. And I will say that I found great joy in Alyssa Thompson's debut goal. I found great joy in Jaden Shaw's Wunder dribble. One of the more dazzling individual runs turned finishes I've ever seen. And great joy in Sophia Smith's like half Thierry Henry from outside the box. Yeah, and Iceland scored a worldie too.
Iceland scored a worldie, which was a lot of fun, and then three players on the U.S. side who either wanted to continue a recent turnaround in form or wanted to get their shooting boots after some injury layoffs. And so everybody sort of got what they needed out of those games.
The second you saw, again, relative dominance from the U.S., they conceded in the first half on goal Casey Murphy almost assuredly will want back. And it was a botched Olympico, basically. Casey Murphy, despite being 6'1", misread what she could do with her feet on that ball and leapt poorly and pushed the ball off the post into her own net. Not what she would want from this opportunity. That's a sad spot for an otherwise, I think, pretty great keeper. But then the U.S. sort of turned it on in the last 20 minutes. Emma Sears, notably on her debut with a goal and an assist. Cool. But otherwise, this was a much less polished performance in my mind in the U.S.
Yeah, but also, like, what does that mean? I mean, it was an 11 that had never really played together before. Emily Sams was making her U.S. debut, partnering with Sonnet in central defense. Like, Yasmin Ryan, who had gotten her debut in the first game, was starting out wide. It was an odd sort of assemblage of players, and again, also speaks to just kind of how meaningless these games really are. Like, there's really nothing to take from the quality of the performance. There's really nothing to take from the results. I mean, we are just at that point in the cycle, especially with the January camp sort of looming over us, that this window, paired with the fact that it had to be an Olympics victory tour, did not allow for any type of real data that can be used for the long term. Like, every now and again, either whether it was Julie Foudy on the broadcast or somebody who wrote about the game, anybody who says like, oh, this wasn't good enough, or like we're seeing a lack of X, Y, or Z from the US, like, who fucking cares? Like, really, like, this is literally just an opportunity for the gang to get back together and for 4 players to make their debuts, all 4 of whom more than deserved their first caps, and in the case of Ryan, 2 caps. So that's all that these games really amount to for the US, like to the point where like Lindsey Horan was playing up front for like a good portion of the first half of game one. Okay, like that's maybe sort of an interesting wrinkle if you feel like you're going up against weak opposition, where somebody of Horan's sort of battering ram qualities could really run up a gut before a low block can set in. That's like sort of interesting. Thompson on the right was really making a meal of it, which was cool. Seeing some good triangles. It's painting with a couple of different brushes in your kit, seeing if people have a good time. It seemed like people had a good time, especially in game one. And then at the end of game two, when Iceland, who is not a great team and is physically inferior and ends up doing what every team like these teams do against the US, they run out of gas, and then you can cut through them like Swiss cheese. That's the only signal from the noise that we can really glean.
Yeah, I mean, especially like, I think a big thing here is not getting too high on particular individual performances that went well. Like Alyssa Thompson, who is in a little bit of a purple patch for herself in the league as well. You saw her tearing apart the defense of Iceland. I think largely because they haven't scouted her particularly well. Those cuts inside, she has largely had to move away from in the NWSL against real-ass defenders. And so for a major tournament, you will see the US up against teams that have watched a lot of game tape and a lot of club tape and have dedicated time to figuring out what individual tricks are for individual players. So it's like fun for Alyssa Thompson to get a fast one over, but not some sort of developmental step forward that I think, like her getting a breakthrough goal is not against Iceland is not a developmental step forward as much as it is a byproduct of the opponent and the amount of care the opponent has put into understanding who Alyssa
and the
Thompson
same goes for the US defensively. I think in the first game, there was a lot of room in transition that Iceland could find, and they ended up getting, I think, like 6-7 shots in the box that first game. And Sveindis Jonsdottir is a super cool player who is obviously going to be the future of Wolfsburg now that Alexandra Popp is on her way out and Eva Pajor left for Bayern Munich. So she gave you problems, but other than her, the U.S. has a bigger scouting operation. They can get tape on a lot of these Icelandic players, but it's not going to be a lot of tape. So how much scouting work could they really do? And also, I think the U.S. always tends to think about like what they're doing themselves, and they were, putting a bunch of differently sized puzzle pieces together and just to see if something could fit. So yeah, it's a big bowl of nothing. The games are fun to watch. I think the Jenna Neiswanger as underlapping left back experiment is maybe like the one thing that we might want to stroke our chins about. Is like, is this how Hayes wants to go long term? Especially in game two, she didn't seem like she was super on the ball, literally and figuratively speaking. But otherwise, like, yeah, it's just a nice little party.
I think if you actually wanted to point out a player who didn't exactly cover themselves in glory, Jenna Neiswanger also had a moment in the first game where she just lost her runner on a through ball that gave Iceland a very clean chance. She just got caught ball watching. Yeah. And you saw very clearly why I think Emma Hayes decided to opt out of the Jenna Neiswanger experiment at the Olympics.
Right.
And I do wonder about Emma Hayes' confidence. If there were one player who I think possibly may have reinforced the preconceived notion in Emma Hayes' mind about what they are in a negative light, Jenna Neiswanger may have been that player in these games.
On the other hand, Jenna Neiswanger clearly is a very talented player who is very young and has a lot of room to grow, develop, and has a lot of potential built in her. So if there is any time to like throw her out and just see how she can react to adverse situations or react to different tactical instruction, well, now's the time. So like even a player like her where she's like the one where maybe I'm casting my gaze askance at her from these two games, I'm also like, yeah, well, maybe in 2.5 years she isn't making those mistakes anymore. That's really possible. Just keep experimenting. we're going to go through this again after Thanksgiving in the next international window. It'll just be probably a few more new players and a few fewer Olympics players. But still, the thing that we're all looking forward to with the U.S. women right now is the January camp and the players who emerge out of that. That's the real focus right now.
Yeah, we still have yet to see debuts from Alyssa Melanson, Ava Gaetino, and Mandy Hott. Of those called in, I suspect we will see all of them.
I would think Hott might be one, A, because she is the youngest goalkeeper called in to the U.S. player pool in a few years. B, her team has nothing to play for in the NWSL. And C, Hayes has absolutely no idea what she might be able to do. And I think that game against Argentina on Wednesday is as low stakes gets, because any players that could possibly be released who have NWSL games on Friday or Saturday are going to be released. I think it's going to be a real stripped down crew available to her. So like Alyssa Melanson might get sent back because Bay's got shit to deal with over the weekend. Hott, literally, this is the only thing that she's got going on right now. So why not? Give her a cap, see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, these are, as I would define them, some don't get hurt friendlies. And none of them are a greater don't get hurt friendly than the Argentina fixture.
Right.
The most don't get hurt friendly imaginable. All right, let's move on to the lion's share of what we're going to talk about in this show. No, not the Ballon d'Or and its pro-European anti-statistical approach. We're going to take a look at the sort of major awards for the NWSL season about to wrap itself up this weekend. And I think for MVP, Rookie of the Year, Defender of the Year, and Goalkeeper of the Year, nothing that happens on the last day of the season moves the needle very much for either of us about who we think wins these awards.
And the other part is that we are, I think, going to be in pretty strong agreement both between each other and I think with how the voting's ultimately going to shake out in MVP, Rookie of the Year, and Goalkeeper of the Year. I feel pretty safe in saying who will win and who should win, and I think we're in alignment on those three. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about who we think should be on the finalists, who should be filling out your number 2 through number 5 on the ballot, who have had great seasons that are worthy of recognition, even if we think that the winners are pretty clear. I think maybe we'll have a little bit more to discuss with Defender of the Year. I don't know where you're at, but I think it's a closer field. And that's also an award that doesn't always go, I think the who will win, who should win split, although I think is going to be the starkest there. So I think there's some grist for the mill to chat about. But I think this is also a chance to kind of understand like what we each value when the margins get pretty fine and things like this. You've already mentioned that you're not always convinced of the efficacy of individual awards in a sport that involves a great deal of team play. But
yeah, I mean, I think it's not that it's, I think I'm more concerned that often legacy and reputation are overrepresented when these awards are given, as opposed to the value. Like sometimes the player who does put together the most statistically impressive season and who does a fair amount of intangible work is also awarded the MVP. That just does happen a fair amount. That said, it doesn't happen consistently enough for me to place huge amounts of value there. And sometimes you're dealing with players, none of whom I think we're going to discuss here, who benefit from the knock-on effects of other teammates contributing to their success in a way that's sort of hard to, and we'll get into this when we talk about our presumptive MVP, and I think the league's presumptive MVP, Temwa Chawinga, and discussion of Dabinia and how much both of them sort of, I think, accelerate each other's qualities. Like that both of them have numbers that look mouth-watering, and I think it's because they play together. But yeah, let's just get into it.
Great.
All right, so MVP.
Yeah.
Evan, can you present an argument for an MVP that isn't Temwa Chawinga?
Well, I think Barbara Banda is the obvious answer. She is basically every significant statistical category you wish to name, she is second place in, or level with Chewinga. And the only reason that she isn't a clear MVP favorite is because Chewinga exists, and Chewinga is just living on another planet right now. No, I mean, Banda, I think maybe had the dip in form later in the season that I thought Chewinga was going to have. Their trajectories went in different directions for me based on how I thought things were going to shape up, like in mid-May. But, I mean, Banda is still putting up almost 0.7 non-penalty XG per 96, which is ludicrous. It's ludicrous. It's going to be a top 5 all-time XG per 96 value in the NWSL. And she's not going to win the MVP award. That's an extraordinary thing. This is a season that by NetG Plus would also be historic if Chewinga wasn't having a better season. The Pride probably have a successful season and make the playoffs without Banda, but I don't think they win the Shield without Banda. If there's anything that Banda's got one over on Chewinga, she's also got great final ball service. She has players that she's been able to unlock in Adriana, Julie Doyle, Summer Yates, that a lot of number 9s don't offer you. And I think that's really, really unique. And again, I have a funny feeling that Chewinga is going to be a unanimous MVP. I can't say that for sure, but it's just so funny because Banda would be that too. We're not saying anything that we haven't said, and a million people haven't said that, like, these two players really do go hand in hand, and like what the story of the 2024 NWSL season will be written as. Banda's just incredible.
As Banda has tapered off, there have been long stretches where I think we both thought Banda would usurp Chewinga as MVP. It hasn't gone that way. Chewinga has been a metronome of goal scoring. You can set your watch to Temwa Chewinga putting something in every 100 or so minutes, and it's a pleasure to watch. And no knock on Barbara Banda for putting together also one of the 10 best seasons in NWSL history, concurrent with her. Just tough shakes. But when Temwa Chewinga broke the single season goal scoring record in the requisite number of games to eclipse Sam Kerr, I do think Chewinga, for reasons that aren't necessarily great in the minds of conventional voters, probably did grab that title and probably will hold that title unanimously because of being able to do something that doesn't actually express the completeness of her game. Temwa Chewinga is more than the sum total of the goals she has created. She is all these other intangible things that she does. She is all the running she does to create space for other teammates. That is, and it's not that Banda doesn't do this either, but Chewinga's, 0.14 XA96 is also very good for a person who is carrying that much of the burden of goal scoring. She's just great. And it's not to say Barbara Banda isn't great. That receiving score, that G plus A receiving score of 0.14 is outrageous. It's outrageous. Yeah. And so I just, it's one of those seasons where you just sit back and hopefully have just enjoyed getting served one of the most dominant offensive seasons you're ever going to see.
Yeah. I agree.
Plain and simple. So those are 1 and 2, right? And if you saw somebody peel off votes from Chewinga, it's probably Banda. Mm-hmm. I think it would be hard to argue for another player peeling off votes from them, number 1 overall. That said, let's finish out our top 5 for MVP. I have 3 other players in mind for myself. I bet we have at least 2 of them in common.
Okay.
So who is third place for your MVP?
I'm putting Trinity Rodman there.
We share this player in common.
She is currently tied for second on the expected assists per 96 list. She's still contributing plenty of good chances on her own, 0.31 XG per 96. She's been the best passing winger in the league. I mean, full stop. She's having the best season of her career, which is incredible to say about a player who, lest we forget, is only 21 years old. And was sadly inevitable that she was going to miss time based on just how much time she's played and the way that she's played between club and international duty. So it's been unfortunate to have lost her for the last 2 or 3 weeks. But she's another person who you could easily see winning an MVP award in another year if it wasn't for the 2 players in front of her that we've already mentioned. There's nothing more you can really say about Trinity Rodman. Like, she is the face of her team.
That's exactly correct as far as I'm concerned. I don't have a ton to add to the Trinity Rodman of it all. I think that the argument, if you're going to pick a Washington Spirit player, a valid thing to do given their place in the standings, in every way that I would like to select Croy Bethune to make this top 5, Trinity Rodman has just been that marginal percentage better, and moreover has been healthy.
Up until recently, exactly.
Was Bethune in this top 5 for me with a decent shout until she got injured? Absolutely. Sure. Croy Bethune is, and we'll get to it when we talk Rookie of the Year, Croy Bethune is a complete force to be reckoned with in this league, and one of the most exciting young creative players I've watched in a very long time. That said, Trinity Rodman is just at the margins and has been consistently better than Croy Bethune in just the slightest possible ways, but moreover has stepped up and filled the void left by Bethune, and Washington really hasn't lost a beat. I suspect that were Washington to lose Trinity Rodman for extended periods of time, the result might look a little bit different.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
She's the...
So no argument.
We forgot to mention the news that both Ludmila and Rosamund Kouassi are going to serve extended suspensions for the hair pulling incident a week ago in the game between Washington and Chicago. Washington's cupboard is awfully bare with regard to attacking talent. For as much attacking depth as they had, they're down Bethune, they're down Santos, they're down Sarr, they're down Kouassi now because of this thing. They are wondering how much Rodman is going to be able to play. The only thing that makes me feel better if I'm a Washington fan about going into that quarterfinal matchup against whoever it will end up being is if Rodman gets healthy. For as thin of an attacking core as you might have, as long as you have Rodman, you got a chance. And there aren't actually a lot, again, to your point about this really being a team sport, there actually aren't a lot of players you can say that about.
It would be appropriate for me to now follow up with number 4, a player whose absence we have seen brutally affect the team that they are on. It is hard to look further than Sophia Smith to be in this top 5 for the MVP conversation. And some of her MVP credentials here are as a byproduct of what the team is without her, in the most traditional sense of valuable player. What is stunning to me is this is a down season for her. Yeah. This is a tough season, and she is still putting up 0.42 non-penalty XG 96.
Fuck yeah, man. Let's sing Sophia Smith's praises to the rafters. You put the amount of XG value up every single year the way that she does. She's one of one. There's a reason I once said that you define the 3 phases of the NWSL by the players who most significantly affected the games themselves. There's a reason I chose Sophia Smith as one of the 2 players who has defined the last 4 years, because she just does this over and over and over again.
So maybe we're going to go 3 for 3 in agreement on this. But who is your 5th?
I think I want to go with Kundananji.
Yeah, I was about to say, this is where I thought we would be in agreement, which is to say, there have been stretches of this year. Kundananji has sort of performed to my expectation of her coming over. I mean, eye-watering statistical profile coming over from Spain to the NWSL. A question of how much of that would translate. And the answer is, it basically just translated. And she does so much work, and in so many different aspects of the game is a facilitator of attacking quality while also doing a fair amount of goal creation, that I think I'm more comfortable taking a look at her on a team that has at times struggled, where I think Bay without Rachel Kundananji, I think is in far more dire straits than, say, Kansas City without Debinha.
Yeah.
Or we already know Louisville without Pickett. We already know Bethune without Washington. I think you look at that 0.32 non-penalty XG 96, that 0.3 XA 96, and the fact that she's been able to do it 2,000 minutes this season. She's been a workhorse. In the ways that Asisata Shwala has maybe disappointed Rachel Kundananji, and I say disappointed in quotations, Rachel Kundananji has not, and I think she's about to guide a Bay team into a playoff spot as an expansion team. And that is incredibly impressive. I think as a dribbler, she has brought something to this league that puts her in, not in the Chewinga Band tier, but in that next tier down. So for me, she's like very clearly, she's in that Smith Rodman tier as a dribbler. I think it's got to be Rachel Kundananji.
She has one of the best cutbacks in the game. Like, I think maybe Trinity Rodman probably has the best cutback in the NWSL, but Kundananji isn't that far behind her. If there's anyone else who you could make a case for, I think the list is pretty small. There are some Bay wins that might become draws, some Bay draws that might become losses without her creative skills, without her ability to create goals and score goals on her own. A bad use of statistics is sometimes people like look at a player's goal and assist totals and then divide that by the team's total goals and assists and decide that, well, if you have a higher share of your team's scoring and creation, then that must mean you were the most valuable player. Well, that just might mean that there was nobody else to do the work. You know, it doesn't mean, and by which I mean, like, if somebody has like a lower percentage than another player, that might mean that they have like 3 other players who can like go and score and create besides them, you know? So I don't know if that really says a whole lot about how much a team lives or dies by a single player. But with Kundananji, I think when you look at everybody else in that attacking core before Penelope Hawking shows up and they really are sort of finding their groove on both sides of the ball, what else can you even say? It's like, it's her and Tess Bodie kind of running the ship there. She has not necessarily been like Temwa Chewinga levels of incredible as in terms of defending from the front, but like, especially during those periods where like Bay just completely lost their defensive shape high up the pitch, she'd be the one going and chasing balls down. She's the one like doing the running. And she didn't have to do that necessarily, given that she was the all-time transfer and was being signed for her attacking chops. Like, she could have played diva in that regard, and she didn't. You know, she's going out and she's fucking hustling. And like, if Bay's going to have any success in the quarterfinals, like she needs to have a good day.
Again, as one of the more sort of intangible qualities that she brings, she is one of the most unpredictable players with the ball at her feet that has, I think, terrorized. She is sort of scout proof because if you attempt to shut one thing down, she figures another thing out. If you attempt to get to play a deeper line and not allow her to use her pace, she uses her dribbling. There has not been an antidote to the Rachel Kundananji problem that any team is really.
You try to double team, then she will thread a cutback or a low cross to somebody who is now open because she stretched the defense all by herself. She can play both wings. She can play wide. She can cut inside. Like, there is pretty much nothing that a winger could do that she can't do.
Yeah, it's been very impressive. Yeah. All right, let's move on. I think we're going to have less to say about Rookie of the Year. So let's cover it quickly. More to say that, like, you only heard one rookie's name discussed in the MVP in the MVP conversation, rightfully so. Is there an argument for a Rookie of the Year not named Croy Bethune?
No, and what's so interesting about it is that you will always find in these kinds of debates somebody who will be like, well, they were injured and they didn't play enough, and therefore you really should count a rookie that goes wire to wire or whatever. Like, she is so undeniable that anytime that is even raised as a question, anyone you will meet will just answer, no, it's fucking Bethune. Like, who else could it be? Like, she is having one of the greatest rookie seasons ever in the league. Like,
Yep.
they 3 players who you might say could get down ballot votes are Emma Sears, Claire Hutton, and Hal Hirschfeld. For me, those would be the other 3 that you would even bring into the conversation. And she has been, by this position weighted version of NetG Plus that I created, like, she's been like twice as good as second place. Like, it's ridiculous.
I think the only, I'm not even sure I would include Hal Hirschfeld.
Yeah,
in
I
this.
might not either. I'm just saying, like,
Hal
those are the
Hirschfeld's
only 3 you could
great,
even come close to bringing up.
Yeah, and I think the best argument in favor of Hal Hirschfeld is probably the worst argument in favor of Croy Bethune, which is just minutes played. But I look at Croy Bethune's nearly 1,600 minutes and say that's more than enough, especially given what you put up in those minutes, how you used those minutes. So, like, if you want to say she got injured, she still played a lot of 90s and, like, contributed mightily in those 90s.
If you want to talk about value to your team, like, without her playing those 90s, yeah, Washington gets to the playoffs, but would they have been as dominant as they were? I think that's an open question. Would they be playing the quarterfinals at Audi Field?
Yeah, maybe not. It is to Washington's credit that they have continued to add all season that makes absorbing the loss of Croy Bethune possible.
Yeah.
And, like, had Washington not decided to go add the also dubiously healthy Lacey Santos and Rosamund Kwasi, the dubiously available Rosamund Kwasi, we might have different concerns with Washington right now. I think Emma Sears is the best second candidate here. She's done a lot to carry a pretty erratic Louisville team at times, but it really comes down to, like, what Emma Sears does as a dribbler. Yeah. And that's where, like, Emma Sears is superlatively talented. Her dribbling G+A 96 is in line with Sophia Smith, is in line with Rachel Kundananji, is in line with Trinity Rodman. It is a special skill, one that has allowed her to basically take the league by storm. She richly deserves her U.S. call-up. The performances have been excellent throughout the season. It just isn't what Croy Bethune did.
And again, like, in another year with one fewer historic season, that you're staring up at from your position on the leaderboard, Sears, I think, is a very deserving Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, she's a credible candidate.
I mean, Sears suffers in part because Bev has gone in and out of trust of her, as she has for so many of her attacking weapons. But I think my number 2, I think, is actually going to be Hutton. That first episode we did of the season, talking about Portland against Kansas City, or Kansas City against Portland, the crazy 5-4, and being a little shocked that this 18-year-old who'd never played a professional minute in her life was getting the start against a team we thought was going to compete for the Shield. And I remember thinking, man, she does not look rattled. She looks comfortable. She looks positionally disciplined when Kansas City doesn't have the ball. She has her head up and is, like, making good passes, smart passes when they have the ball. Let's see if this isn't just, beginner's luck. And it hasn't been beginner's luck. Like, no defensive midfielder, no number 6 has ever performed as well as Hutton has at her age. Like, for an 18-year-old to be doing this and to be doing it consistently, and that's really the key part. For a player at that age, at that position, to have played this much and to have played this well, basically from start to finish, is extraordinary. And I think it speaks volumes about her future, both at club level and potentially at international level. She might be the answer to pair with Sam Coffey, maybe not for 2027, but maybe for the 2028 Olympics, 2031. This player has an incredibly bright future ahead of her.
I mean, we talk about it. Few indicators are better for young players than simply getting reps. And Claire Hutton has used her reps to be one of the most productive 6s in the league.
And by the way, the only reason that she doesn't have the minutes total of Hirschfeld is because she fucked off to go lead the U20 team in the World Cup. That's the only reason that she's, like, missing, like, 400, 500 minutes from her resume.
Yeah, I'll say this. If Claire Hutton is not at the January camp and Corbin Albert is...
we riot.
We riot at dawn.
Sears and Hutton, two players who would have deserved it any other year and have very bright futures ahead of them. Let's do goalkeeper of the year first, because I think we can bang through that pretty quickly, too.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement on that one, too. Credit to Anna Morehouse for a great
What a season. An incredible season. Building off an incredible season from last year, too. Got herself an England call-up as a result.
Richly deserved. Take Mary Earps' job. Enjoy Mary Earps' job. Be much better at Mary Earps' job than Mary Earps. That said, you are the second best keeper in the league, probably. Credit to Casey Murphy, who, despite the gaffe against Iceland, has put together a really nice season for North Carolina.
Great shot-stopping season, and probably has made North Carolina look better than they actually are defensively.
Loads and loads of love here to Mandy Haught. You have salvaged a hell of a season out of time at Utah.
Got yourself an injury-related call-up to the U.S. team as well. And honestly, at this point, until a better option comes along, is my preferred successor to Alyssa Nair. A great shot stopper and a great distributor of the ball, which you don't always find those things existing in the same goalkeeper. And at her age, nothing but up for old Mandy Haught.
Let's just say quick mention to Aubrey Kingsbury, who made this list, to Jane Campbell, who is doing her own Alamo recreation in Houston and really holding off the enemy at the gates, or quote unquote. She is playing a very difficult game of paintball, except they're soccer balls, and has not gotten herself eliminated. And Kaylin Sheridan, who's on this list, who hasn't had her best season, which still makes her a top half goal.
And maybe also underlines how significant she was in making San Diego's defense under Casey Stoney so good. But we don't need to tell you how good Kaylin Sheridan is. That's old news. What we are here to do is to talk about a keeper who wasn't even in the league in the first 4 games of the season, was not someone who you would ever thought was going to have the kind of career renaissance that she had. Finally broke in with her national team at the ripe old age of 33. As a result, became a bit of an Olympics hero. It's on Katrin Berger.
If you want reasons for why I think Gotham are like really dangerous in elimination games, it's you got this on Katrin Berger character who has put together just an outrageous shot-stopping profile, in addition to being very good in distribution herself. 0.71 goals per post-shot XG conceded.
You're having a great season if you're like 0.85. You're having quite a good season if you're at like 0.9. She is giving up 0.7 of a goal for every post-shot XG she deals with. It's crazy. And if you want to say that it's a small sample thing, because we often talk about that, shot stopping takes a lot of shots in order to stabilize. Well, she's been very good for Chelsea for many years running. You know, like this isn't some fly-by-night operation. And she is facing consistently better offenses week in and week out than she did when she was with Chelsea. I don't doubt the quality of Ann-Katrin Berger at all.
When Evan and I inevitably do our best 11s draft, it will be to the detriment of one of us who doesn't get Ann-Katrin Berger because it so clearly has been the best goalkeeper. And again, no amount of a howler could she have on the last day of the season to really change this. It's a stunning performance. Ann-Katrin Berger is just one of those. She's on the kind of heater, and maybe it's not a heater, but like let's say you just sit back and marvel at it. And you should. It's great. And if she has a howler or two in the playoffs, whatever, she still deserves this award.
And also, like, those would have been maybe the first 2 serious howlers of her entire season. I certainly can't think of any off the top of my head. Like, she's just been pretty immaculate at every part of the position, from wire to wires, ever since she showed up in New Jersey.
All right, let's go to Defender of the Year, where I think that there is legitimate debate and some interesting philosophical stuff to discuss about the value of fullbacks versus the value of center backs.
There should be debate here. There should be philosophical differences because this is the most difficult thing in the sport to analyze. How do you determine whether an individual defender is better than another at a level that can be contributed to that player themselves and not their teammates or the tactical system in which they operate? It's really, really hard. Let's go back to your fullbacks versus center backs concept. Can you explain what you mean? Like, what are we thinking about when we're trying to judge defensive value between fullbacks and center backs? How is it difficult for other players to judge those cross-positionally?
I think you have to, in both cases, you have to incorporate the system. And in the case of center backs, it's usually a partnership and what is being asked of the partner. We talked a lot about this in relation to the US women, where you have sort of the louder defender, louder center back and the quieter center back pairing. Yeah. So that's going to sort of present itself numerically differently in these kinds of ways. But when we're talking about fullbacks, like in the case of Carson Pickett, who we are both very high on and both think is a revelation, so much more attacking contribution exists, which is, when you say defender of the year, rarely are we ever thinking about what a center back is contributing offensively. There are so few, Sam Staub being an outlier here, who do anything that meaningfully contributes or repeatedly contributes. Whereas when we are talking about a fullback, we are talking about somebody who often is a at least secondary component of the attack and is expected to bring some form of goal creation, whether it be in the form of crossing or long passing, or occasionally even in the form of like intricate near passing, build up play, or shooting. You just don't get a lot of that out of center back, ever. Nor should you. It's not what the game demands of it. And yet, because these people all play hypothetically on the same line and are all called defenders, they are sometimes lumped together. And I think Defender of the Year is a problematic award title. It should be Center Back of the Year and Fullback or Wingback of the Year. Just because the demands are completely different. The tools, even using an overarching stat to define them, misses the larger picture of what is being asked of them.
And what another wrinkle to even add into that, going back to the concept of a center back partnership, the loud defender, the quiet defender, who pushes up, who stays behind. You can even see that in Kurtz and Malia Berkeley together, where Kaylee Kurtz, almost the entirety of her value is being generated by on-ball actions, whereas Berkeley, even with possession adjustments, is negative relative to her position in terms of on-ball defense. Does that mean Malia Berkeley has been a bad defender? Probably not. Probably what it means is that she's the one tasked with closing down passing lanes and shepherding players to less preferred areas of the field without lunging in for tackles or pushing up higher and being more aggressive in other parts of the field, whereas Kurtz is the destroyer in that pairing and then gets to go ball hunting. So that's another thing that you got to think about. Even the best tool we have for measuring defensive ability, which is defensive net G+, which calculates the possession value of both your on-ball and your off-the-ball defensive capabilities, it's not super sticky year over year. It's got a lot of teammate noise built into it. As a descriptive tool, it's useful, but even the off-ball component of it is also very heavily teammate and tactics influenced. And that's not even to get into like who had more tackles than somebody else, which, like, as everybody knows, if you're a defender on a bad team, you can rack up a ton of tackles. It does not mean you're a good defender. It just means you had more volume of opportunity. And the other part is that, like, defensive net G+ hates Naomi Girma. So automatically you should be skeptical of it as a buck stops here kind of stat. It's a good place to start, but we got to build the conversation from there. It can't be like, oh, one player's defensive net G+ is better than another player's. That's the end of it. It's a beginning. It's not an end in terms of whatever discourse we're about to hold. And again, nothing underscores that more than the fact that the stat does not like Naomi Girma and hasn't for the last couple of years. But I tried to at least strip as much noise out of it as I could. And so I went season by season, position by position, and looked at the on-ball component of G+, which is called interrupting. So what interrupting does, if you don't know, is it measures on-ball defensive actions, tackles, blocks, interceptions, loose ball recoveries, and clearances. As every other part of the possession value model does, what it's doing is it's not only judging the success or failure of that action, but it's also judging like where on the field it happened, and also the two things that happened before it and the two things that happened after it. And from that, tries to determine how much more or less likely the opposition would generate a high-quality XG chance. So what are things that can really swing interrupting in one way or another? A goal line clearance. A goal line clearance for a center back can honestly just completely skew your season numbers. And again, volume of opportunity really, really matters here. So with those caveats, I made a possession adjustment. So on FBref, you can pull a team's total opponent's touches. So what I did was I just took everybody's interrupting values, their raw interrupting values, so not position adjusted yet. Took their raw interrupting values, and I divided that by the number of opponent touches their team had faced, multiplied that by 600. Why 600? Because 600 opponent touches is about the average number of touches in a game. So it's a decent proxy to like a per 96 calculation. Then what I did was I looked at every single positional group, found out what the positional average was for this possession-adjusted interrupting figure. Then I subtracted the positional average from a player's possession-adjusted interrupting. Voila, you get your both possession and position-adjusted interrupting figure. And it's a roughly per 96 figure because we're going by per 600 opponent touches. You combine that then with a player's G minus above positional average per 96 minutes, and you get a possession and position adjusted defensive net G plus above average per 96 that I think probably does as good a job as any of stripping as much noise as you can out of the stat with the acknowledgement that it's still pretty noisy. So I came up with 5 players who are at the top of the leaderboard for both fullbacks and center backs by this number. The best defender by this figure is Casey Kruger, possession adjusted defensive net G plus above positional average per 96 minutes. Also, that stat is a big old mouthful. We got to come up with a snappier name. Anybody has any suggestions? Drop them in the comments. But right behind her is Kaylee Kurtz, center back for the North Carolina Courage, and Kylie Strom, center back for the Orlando Pride. They're at 0.13. Carson Pickett, left back first for Racing Louisville and now the Orlando Pride, 0.11. And Ryan Williams, right back for the Courage, 0.10. I think it's also important to note here that we've got 2 Pride players and 2 Courage players. So when we talk about teammate effects and tactics and systems, that needs to be kept in mind as well. And then we've got Kruger at the top of the list. And also there are probably players that listeners are thinking about. They're like, well, why isn't this player in the top 5? Why isn't that player in the top 5? And again, the stat hates Naomi Girma. So if you don't think that this stat is actually producing real understanding of individual defensive skill, that's fine. I'm just trying to give you the baseline that we can then build from and however we want to argue this issue.
First, Evan, who are players that you feel like maybe should be in consideration for the Defender of the Year award who aren't being mentioned here?
It's hard because I'm not a scout. I'm not a trained scout. I watch a lot of soccer and I know more or less what to look for in how a defender plays, but I do not always have that like really scouty granular level of analyzing a player's quality in that way. And I'm also really mindful of the fact that because of teammate and system bias, like it would be really easy for me to say like Emily Sams probably should be on this list. Again, Girma, even though San Diego's had a real down year defensively, both before and after Casey Stoney got fired. Is this the one year where maybe Net G Plus is actually picking up some signal in Girma's defensive performance? Interestingly enough, unlike past years, this is a season where Girma has had incredibly high on-ball production and incredibly low off-ball production, which kind of tells me that maybe the system has been going to shit, and Girma, because she's the athlete that she is doing everything she can to like make up for it, and has lost some positional discipline. Okay, so that's some things to bear in mind. I mean, Sams is probably the player that is at the top of this list for me, or maybe one of the Kansas City fullbacks, whether it's Izzy Rodriguez.
Yeah, Izzy Rodriguez is...
Yeah, and like Rodriguez like really shines because she's got incredible passing vision, but she has been very good defensively. And I think you can also say the same for Haley Mason, Ellie Wheeler when they've played. Like, I think that fullback core generally has been really, really strong. And a lot of these players, by the way, look good by this statistic. They're just not top 5. It's tricky. I mean, who jumps to mind for you?
Emily Sams and Izzy Rodriguez were the two that I was going to immediately point out. I would also say I know that she has had maybe 1 or 2 real howlers, but Tara McKeown from Washington is a defender who I think does a ton. And obviously the now injured Sam Staub, who I think probably would have made this list, but for minutes threshold.
Yeah.
She just offers you something that nobody else in this league does. I have been a long-term Sam Staub stan. I have also felt like, just considering the eye test, Abby Dahlkemper at Bay has been a dramatic improvement. Small sample, caveat there. But this list reflects, frankly, for me, a really good cross-section of players. And at the absolute top of this list is who I would have selected as Defender of the Year. I talked about it in preseason. I thought Casey Kruger to Washington was like perfect player, perfect system to succeed, and we have effectively seen that. Moreover, she also solves for me the debate between fullback and center back, which is to say she can play both and play both at high competency. It makes her unique among the other 4 that are listed here. She is, in the complete sense, in a holistic way, the Defender of the Year for me, not only because of her possession-adjusted, weighted defensive net G+, which I think we need to start calling something like pod or pond, but she is just, also, if you're just a casual watcher of this game and you're looking for like eyeball, excellent on-ball defender, shutdown man marking, she often is given the hardest assignments and handles them with aplomb. So for my money, this actually isn't that hard a competition. I think Kaylee Kurtz has put together a really brilliant season, but I also think she has support in teammates. I'm adding Tara McKeown here because I think what McKeown does often enables Kruger. Like what I think that Washington's back line does often enables Kruger to be as good as she is. That said, Casey Kruger for me is my Defender of the Year without much
a couple of things. Kruger has attacking abilities, and she's demonstrated them in years past. This is a year where she's not actually required to do a lot of that work. Because in the Adrian Gonzalez phase of things, I think he was really, really interested in making sure that there was defensive cover when he sent Bethune, Sarr, and Rodman flying forward. So Kruger was asked to hold back a little bit. Afterward, when Rosamond Kouassi's been playing on that wing, well, you don't need to stretch defenses out wide on that side of the field because Kouassi's doing it for you. And that's also not to mention that, like, both under Gonzalez and Giraldes, like, the way that Sarr could interchange with whoever was on the left, whether it was Ashley Hatch or, Bethune pulling wide, that level of interchange also made sure that there was energy on the left wing in the final third and in the box. So Kruger really has been allowed to focus on her defensive duties. Probably not the worst thing in the world for a wide player at her age, because she's just naturally will have lost a yard of pace. But it doesn't matter. And I think the thing that really jumps out to me about Kruger is I always look for players who have really, really good G- numbers who might actually be outperforming their other teammates in that category. This could be correlation, not causation, whatever, but it should be significant to note that 0.06 G- above positional average per 96 is 3 points higher than the next everyday defender in Washington's setup. That is not an insignificant jump. And so it should tell you how, like, there is just never any room for opposing right wingers or right backs to move when they have to deal with Casey Kruger. And so I'm very comfortable despite all the caveats we've made, very comfortable with calling Casey Kruger the Defender of the Year. We're both in agreement about Kruger being the Defender of the Year. If someone else wanted to make a pretty well-reasoned argument for basically any other player to win this award, I'd listen. I might even be convinced. I don't know.
We both watch an unhealthy amount of this game and have thought an unhealthy amount about this game. But neither of us were professional defenders. And I think that there is something that we have yet to properly capture in the numbers that presents, like, again, it is to your point, it is what Naomi Girma is not liked by this system. And yet Naomi Girma is a generational talent.
Yeah. And no one would argue. Even the wonkiest stat heads would never argue that point.
Yeah, it's just sort of like a head scratcher that the numbers don't care that much about Naomi Girma. And it's more, we just need the numbers to get better, or like how we're evaluating it to get better, rather than Naomi Girma needs to change something about her game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely.
Like we're just not capturing it yet. And it's a thing that I know that both of us have thought a significant amount about. That said, I feel really good about the 5 defenders you have selected. I actually think, in particular, Kaylee Kurtz and Ryan Williams, just for their for the Iron Man that they've put together this season as well, just staying available. I think it's a big part of, and God, do we dog on North Carolina on this pod, but it is a big part of what has made North Carolina one of the most uninteresting teams to cover.
And they are a partnership. They play on the same side of the field, and Feliu has had injuries, so she's been in and out. But when you talk about Berkeley and then on that right side with Kurtz and Williams, that has just been North Carolina's defense. Even the best teams in this league have had pretty significant defensive disruptions this year, whether it's Orlando losing Raffaele earlier in the season, whether it's Kansas City basically ripping up the whole central defense playbook and starting again in early September, or Washington sometimes not always trusting Aneg Batel and having Esme Morgan come in there at center back, or if it's Gotham adding Jess Carter, losing Tierna Davidson to injury, having Jess Carter play as a center back sometimes instead of a fullback, which she can do. Like, there's been so much chopping and changing in that top 4 among defenses, but North Carolina hasn't had to deal with it.
Yep. It is one of the strongest assets that North Carolina brings forward into the playoffs is tremendous consistency from their back line. And Ryan Williams, a name we've not said a lot on the podcast, I think does deserve. I mean, we've talked about Kurtz, we've talked about Strom, we've talked about Pickett. We have not mentioned Ryan Williams' name, and Ryan Williams deserves the 5th slot in this prospective defender.
Steady as she goes. That's Ryan Williams in a nutshell. There's not much to talk about because she never creates a reason to talk about her. She's a great on-ball defender, but it's not because she's constantly getting caught out behind and having to chase down players. She just plays her position really, really well and wins the ball a lot. Do we want to talk about Coach of the Year at all? I mean, it's going to be Seb Hines, right? Like
Seb Hines, notable credit to Vlatko and Danovsky, particularly given the narrative surrounding him before this season began. Turns out still pretty good.
You know, maybe Jonathan Heraldez and Adrian Gonzalez as a pair be kind of interesting, turning Washington into what it is.
Who's your not Coach of the Year? Is it Amy Rodriguez?
No, it's Fran Alonso.
That's Fran Alonso. It's Fran Alonso.
For not coaching. Maybe some down ballot votes for Albertine Montoya, just for nothing else than like having the self-awareness and the humility to learn from his mistakes and to change things mid-season and to have it work. But that's an important part of coaching, is to like adapt when things aren't going the way that you planned. I mean, obviously Hines should win this in a walk. I don't think anyone would disagree, but it's an interesting thought to maybe throw Montoya a couple of like 5th place votes for that.
How about a stupid one here to close this out? Most surprising player of the year.
It's Chewinga.
Yeah, no, we just did not see this coming. We did not have the scouting. Yeah. There was no way to know that this little dynamo from the Chinese Super League and Malawi was going to take this league by absolute storm.
And a player who, if you needed any more convincing why the Ballon d'Or voting is not paying attention to the right things, it's that Temwa Chewinga was not a top 5 finalist. Temwa Chewinga scored 20 goals against the best defenses in the world. But no, she's not in consideration for best player of the year.
And this is why I think these awards are stupid. In summation, look at that. We made an elliptical episode, Evan.
I'm about to rewatch Lost Highway, so I've been thinking about Mobius strips. So to end this episode, Dick Laurent is dead. Thank you for listening to this episode. Please rate us, review us, follow us, tell all your friends about us, rate us 5 stars if you're going to rate us at all. Follow us on all social channels at XOwnGoals. That's the letter X Own Goals, including a burgeoning following over on Blue Sky. If you think we've made an own goal, please email us at expectedowngoals@gmail.com. That's the letter expectedowngoals@gmail.com. Hit us on social, hit us on email for your picks for Defender of the Year, or if you think like you've got a really good case for someone for MVP or Rookie of the Year that we haven't mentioned. Would love to hear about that. If you got $6 a month burning a hole in your pocket and you love this content already, well, guess what? You can join our Patreon, link in the show notes, for 4 bonus episodes every single month, as well as access to our Discord server and our YouTube live streams, which we will be doing all throughout the playoffs. We wanted to do one for Decision Day this weekend, but the NWSL fucked that up. For $6 a month, join the community. It's a lot of fun over on Discord, as well as on the bonus eps. So if you are a Patreon subscriber already, we will speak to you on Thursday. Otherwise, chat you up on main feed to talk about the final weekend of the season and whether Portland really screwed the pooch and if Louisville performed a miracle.
One last thing for you guys. If you write a review for us on Apple Podcasts, I will read it on air. Even if it's a negative review, I will read it on air and we will own that. Please don't write the negative review. We would much prefer to read 5-star reviews, but we would love it if you would write us a review and we promise to read it on air unless when you write that review, you explicitly state, Eric, don't you dare read this on air, in which case I won't.
In light of Ludmila's suspension, this might be the only opportunity for either of us to do anything humiliating in public.
Yeah.
So if you know, folks. All right. Bye.